You're going to need a lot less Bitcoin than you think to retire. So global wealth today is 900 trillion. If you get just a conservative 10x in global wealth then goes to 9 quadrillion. If you think Bitcoin takes 10% of that, we're at $257 million per Bitcoin without hyperinflation. I still think that's conservative, and I still think that's thinking in a vacuum. So you run that experiment and say, what happens if Bitcoin gets 50% of the world's wealth? You're looking at $1.24 billion per Bitcoin if global wealth 10x's. Again, some people can accept that. I still think it's too bearish, which is why I like this thought experiment here. If anybody's feeling a little bit bearish with the price of Bitcoin at $60,000, I hope you enjoy this speech because it's going to get very, very bullish. I want to, once and for all, end the debate surrounding how much Bitcoin you need to retire. I want to see a show of hands. Who has watched a video on YouTube talking about how much Bitcoin you need to retire? At least 80% of you guys have watched one of these videos, and I'm guilty. You can see my big ugly mug there on one of those thumbnails. But today I'm going to be explaining why all of these videos are flawed. They're good. Don't get me wrong, they're good, but I'm going to be talking about the two fundamental flaws that they all miss. The first is looking at Bitcoin's scarcity. Everybody looks at this through a myopic linear lens. We know that not all 21 million Bitcoin are actually available for sale, but nobody's extrapolated forwards into the future. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen corporations buy 6% of the Bitcoin supply, ETFs 7% of the Bitcoin supply, nation states have 3% of the Bitcoin supply, and they want to buy so much more. And when you start looking at the future and what is the 10-year digital gold rush that Michael Saylor coined, which started in 2024, I think most of us are greatly overestimating how much Bitcoin's actually going to be available by 2034. That's the first big fundamental flaw that we're going to be diving into today. The second big fundamental flaw is everybody just assumes that Bitcoin's going to be digital gold. It's going to be this $50 trillion asset. It's going to take 10% of the $900 trillion of wealth in the world. And I'm going to show you why that is incredibly flawed. Everybody thinks that global wealth is just going to grow at 1 to 2% per year. I'm actually going to make the case for why global wealth might grow by a factor of 10 or maybe even 100 over the next 20 to 30 years. I know that sounds crazy, but most people don't understand that we are living through something that we've only seen 3 times before in human history. We are moving from the industrial age to the digital age. And the last time, in the 1770s, when we moved from the agricultural age to the industrial age, we saw a 100x in global wealth. You can see it here on the chart. For 10,000 years, global wealth per person, it didn't change. It was at $400 at 10,000 BC. And if you go all the way forward, 11,700 years later, in the year 1700, global wealth per person, it was $600. It went from 400 to 600. But today, the world is dramatically different. And I'm going to make the case that the 4 technologies that have come together today in the digital age, they are going to do the same thing that these 4 technologies did as we went into the industrial age. And I'm going to make the case that we are living in a completely new era. And again, I have a lot to talk about with this 100x in global wealth. I want to actually start by looking at the digital gold rush. So we've talked about our 2 fundamental flaws. Let's start with the digital gold rush. So in 2024, I believe that the number of Bitcoin held in the hands of forever hodlers is probably 100,000 coins. All right? But since 2024, what have we seen? ETFs, public corporations, and nation states all FOMO into the space. And I think nobody is accounting for in the future what happens if these entities keep doing what they've done in the past 2 years. Because we're going to get into a world very rapidly where by 2028 or 2030, 10% of the maybe 10 million coins, half of the Bitcoin supply is locked in the hands of people who are never selling. And this isn't going to have a linear effect on the Bitcoin supply. This is going to be exponential. When one man owns 850,000 coins, what happens when the other billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, etc., what happens when Michael is wealthier than them? The only way that they remain in the top 5, top 10 richest people in the world is by buying more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. How many people can buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor? There is, where was that chart? There's 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges. Michael nearly owns 1 million. This is the maths that nobody is considering. In the future, this digital gold rush is going to have really far-reaching implications for Bitcoin and the world. Because we've been in a 6-year supply suffocation. So the number of Bitcoin on exchanges in 2020, it was 3.5 million. Today, it's 2.5 million. And everybody's looking at the price, and they're saying, oh, nothing's happened. The supply shock doesn't matter. The supply shock is a meme because the price hasn't moved. But what people are missing is look at what the multiplier effect has done. It was 2.5x in 2020. So that means for every $1 that wants to flow into Bitcoin in 2020, this pushed Bitcoin's market cap up by 2.5x. Today, it's closer to 6x. And that's because we've seen 1 million Bitcoin leave the exchanges forever. And it's my fundamental thesis that by 2030, there's going to be 0 Bitcoin on exchanges. And I know some people will start throwing tomatoes at me or something in a minute. But I'm going to make the case for why I think that's going to happen. And what kind of impact that's going to have on Bitcoin's price. So it's very obvious the paper market and the expansions of the options market has dampened Bitcoin's price over this past 6 years that we've been living in a supply shock. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the digital gold rush later. Let me try to quickly make the case for why we're going to see this 100x in global wealth. It's my thesis that what the printing press did for knowledge, information, and communicating knowledge, the internet is once again repeating this. The printing press took us out of the agricultural age and put us into the industrial, and I think the internet is doing the exact same thing today. So I believe that technologies come and go. We see technologies every decade, every few years, but when you see 4 or 5 fundamental improvements in technologies, and when they come together, you actually get transitions into completely new eras or new ages. And that is what I believe is happening. And I believe we're living through what is going to be the quickest transition in human history. I think everybody knows the world feels crazy and wild and unpredictable today, but nobody's actually identifying the root cause. I mean, most of you guys in the room know that the money is broken. That's obvious. But I think when you really zoom out and you look at a 10,000-year history of technology, you start to see Bitcoin in a much bigger lens. And I'm actually going to make the case that Bitcoin is the economic singularity. I think every technology we've seen up until now, it's just been a precursor to create energy money. I think Bitcoin is going to be bigger than fire. It's going to be bigger than the printing press. It's going to be bigger than the wheel. It will be, and it will have the biggest impact on our civilization. Now, I think this transition is going to happen quicker than those 3 transitions we were talking about earlier. So the transition from hunters and gatherers into agricultural societies, this took 2,000 years. The next transition from the agricultural societies to industrial societies, that happened in 200 years. So it's an order of magnitude difference. And I think the transition we're living through today, I actually think it's going to be a 20-year transition. And I think we're about 3 to 4 years into that, maybe 5 or 6 years. And I think 2020 was this big inflection point that kind of made it obvious to everybody the industrial age is dead. And that means all of the industrial era jobs is dead. Lawyers have just been completely obsoleted by AI in the past 6 months. What happens 6 years from now to lawyers, engineers, doctors, government bonds? Everything from the industrial age is going to be completely obsoleted by the digital age. And you can see it from all these metrics: uncertainty in economic trade, uncertainty in economic policy. You can see it fundamentally shifted in 2020. Everybody's been hysterical since 2020. But it's not the lockdowns or it's not blue versus red that's the issue. The issue is the industrial age is dead. We're living in the digital age now. And Bitcoin is obviously at the forefront of that transition. Like I said, I think it's going to happen in 20 years. And I think we're actually living through 5 cycles that is going to speed up this transition into the digital age. The digital age transition, it was happening irrespective of the fact that we're also living through the conclusion of an 80-year long-term debt cycle. We're living through the unwinding of a 90-year fourth turning cycle. We're also living through the end of a 100-year global reserve currency cycle. And obviously, the US empire is being challenged. I don't think China's going to take the US empire, but people are talking about that. So the biggest shift that I want everybody in this room to be aware of is when new technology comes along, it completely destroys previous technology. The automobile completely destroyed the horse and carriage. We used books for thousands. We trusted the church for thousands of years. The printing press came along and completely obsoleted that. The same with horses. We used horses for thousands of years. The automobile completely destroyed that industry in a matter of 10 years. The same with light bulbs. And again, our brains are not wired to extrapolate what the next 10 years is going to mean for us. I first learned about this fact about how folding a piece of paper 50 times can go to the moon in Jeff Booth's incredible book, The Price of Tomorrow. And it's just an example of explaining how our brains are not wired to think in exponentials. I think if you look at civilization, we're at probably fold 39. Like if you look at us on a 10,000-year history, I think the Industrial Revolution was like fold 38 of the piece of paper. And we're now at like fold 40 or 41. This is why the world feels so crazy. And the big takeaway here that I want you guys to take away from this speech is people who adopt these new disruptive technologies, they become kings, emperors, the richest people in the world. If you look at the richest people to ever live on this world, who were they? And look at what era in time they lived through. They essentially used new technology to take all of the wealth. The new industrials, the industrial societies, they took all the wealth from the agricultural societies. And if you look at the world's richest people, 8 out of the 10 richest people, what do they all have in common? Digital age businesses. The industrial age is dead. If you look, so many people think that the Mag 7 is a bubble. Tesla, Amazon, Nvidia, it's a bubble. What I think they're missing is these are digital age businesses. They're showing you something very clearly. 7 companies are worth more money than 3 billion people. If you combine India, China, Europe, you combine all of their GDPs together, 7 companies are more valuable than them. That's not because people in India or Europe or China don't work hard. It's because their economies are based in industrial age jobs. That's the big takeaway. We need to adopt new technology, and those who adopt it first, they're going to become millionaires. Like a lot of people are looking at the rise of teenage millionaires and teenage billionaires as this weird, unexplainable thing. All they're doing is they're adopting digital businesses. They're swimming in a blue ocean where there's no competition. The industrial age jobs, it's a massive red ocean. I'm going to whip through some slides because I want to get to some interesting thought experiments about how to value Bitcoin. And let me quickly walk through the thought experiment for why I think we're going to see a 100x in global wealth. So global wealth today is 900 trillion. if you get just a conservative 10x in global wealth then goes to 9 quadrillion. If you think Bitcoin takes 10% of that, we're at $257 million per Bitcoin without hyperinflation. I still think that's conservative, and I still think that's thinking in a vacuum, because technology is a winner-take-all. I think Bitcoin's going to take all of the wealth in the world that's looking for a store of value. So you run that experiment and say, what happens if Bitcoin gets 50% of the world's wealth? You're looking at $1.24 billion per Bitcoin if global wealth 10x's. Again, some people can accept that. I still think it's too bearish, which is why I like this thought experiment here. I think we're going to see 100x in global wealth over the next 2 decades, 3 decades. Maybe it happens in 4. I don't know. The future is uncertain. But if you get that 100x, you've got a $45 quadrillion market cap for Bitcoin. You've got to use that 6x multiplier effect. And then you're looking at an $8.57 billion per Bitcoin price tag. I know it's crazy. I know it's hard to think about. I know exponentials are difficult to wrap our minds around. But I really do think Bitcoin is going to change the world more than any other technology in human history. And we need to think bigger. We need to think more bullish. All of these models that are extrapolating Bitcoin's data from the first 16 years in the industrial era, all of these models are going to break. They don't account for the fact that we're in the digital age now. I think, honestly, you're going to need a lot less Bitcoin than you think to retire. I genuinely think Bitcoin isn't a $1 million asset or a $50 million asset. I think it's much closer to a $500 million per coin Bitcoin, or it's $1 billion Bitcoin. And I think, again, believe it or not, this is still my conservative take. If I had have actually gotten as bullish as I genuinely think Bitcoin will be, you probably would have booed me off stage. But $8 billion Bitcoin, that's kind of where we need to be. And if you think Bitcoin's going to be worth hundreds of millions, you can retire on a lot less Bitcoin than you think. But again, buy as much as you can. This is the opportunity. Nobody is looking at Bitcoin through the correct lens, which is why you can buy as much Bitcoin as possible today. And I highly encourage you, not financial advice, but buy as much as you can while it's at $60,000. I've whipped through 139 slides. I'm late. I'm going to get off stage. Thank you so much to everyone who came to the conference. It's an incredible conference. Buy more Bitcoin.